The cold air bites, sharp and clean, carrying the sound of heavy things scraping against wood. It's a raw sound, tearing at the quiet street. My knuckles are white where they grip the steering wheel, parked just far enough down the block that the unfamiliar faces hauling furniture don't notice me. Just another car on a Tuesday morning. But I'm not just another car. I'm the silent, unseen audience for this very specific, highly anticipated performance. Through the windshield, I see them. Him. His face, usually a mask of smug confidence, is a chaotic mess of disbelief, confusion, then rapidly blooming scarlet rage. He's shouting, his voice muffled through the glass, but the posture screams fury. Next to him, she stands, pale, her eyes wide and darting, clutching a designer handbag like a shield. The woman he boasted about, the one he couldn't wait to bring into my life, my home. The movers, solid and unyielding, ignore his protests, hefting a large, garish armchair, something she must have picked out, through the doorway. The sheriff's deputy, a figure of calm authority in the eye of their storm, stands nearby, arms crossed, a picture of detached professionalism. They are being systematically, undeniably removed. From the house. From this house. The one they thought was theirs, their stage for a new, cruel beginning. The satisfaction is a slow, dark bloom in my chest, heavy and intoxicating. It's not joy, not exactly. It's colder, sharper. A precise, calculated justice delivered. Their carefully constructed world, built on my ruin, is collapsing outward, spilling onto the lawn in a heap of expensive, unwanted possessions. And I am here, watching, breathing it in. The chill isn't just the air, it's the temperature of revenge served ice cold. If you've ever watched something you thought was lost come back to you, or felt the unexpected shift of power when you were certain you had none, you know this feeling. It's complex, unsettling, but undeniably potent. Tell me where you're watching from, what time it is for you right now. And if you haven't subscribed yet, please do. It helps me keep sharing these moments, these stories, more than you could ever know. Before the cold and the chaos, before the shouting and the heavy furniture, there was just the quiet hum of a life I believed in. We had this house, this quiet street, this feeling of having finally landed. It wasn't grand, not a mansion perched on a hill, but it was ours. Or it felt like ours. 2 stories, a small yard out back that caught the afternoon sun just right, a porch swing that creaked a gentle rhythm on summer evenings. It was a place where I envisioned futures unfolding, lazy weekend mornings, dinners with friends, maybe even the messy, joyful chaos of children one day. He was charming. He had this way of making you feel like the center of his universe, like every thought he had was a carefully considered gift he was bestowing upon you. He wasn't rich in the traditional sense, not when we met. We were building something together, piece by piece. The house felt like the cornerstone of that build. I remember the feeling of the key in the lock for the first time, the echo of our voices in the empty rooms, planning where the couch would go, imagining laughter filling the space. My father, bless his pragmatic heart, had helped us. Generously. He always said real security wasn't about fleeting wealth, but about having solid ground beneath your feet. He'd been through tough times himself, lost everything once, and he believed in tangible assets, things that couldn't disappear with the next market fluctuation. He'd helped us navigate the complex world of mortgages and deeds, his guidance invaluable. He'd structured things in a way that gave us the house, secured our future, he'd said. I didn't understand all the specifics, the legal jargon blurring into a haze of gratitude and excitement. All I knew was that his help, his wisdom, made this home possible. It felt like a gift, a foundation poured by the man who had always been my rock. Life settled into a comfortable rhythm. Workdays, quiet evenings, the small rituals that build a life together. Making coffee the same way every morning, arguing good-naturedly over the thermostat, the comfortable silence of reading in the same room. There were arguments, of course, small ones, the kind that feel like static on the line rather than a complete disconnection. I attributed them to stress, to the everyday pressures of building a life. I saw a future stretching out before us, a comfortable, predictable path lined with shared memories and growing old together in this house. This home. It felt secure, unshakable. I was naive. Or maybe I just desperately wanted to believe in the stability I thought we had built. I poured my energy into making it a home, painting walls, tending the small garden, finding just the right curtains. It wasn't just a house. It was the physical manifestation of my hopes, my commitment, my belief in US. I felt safe here, protected, rooted. It was everything I thought I wanted. The air inside smelled of lemon polish and whatever was cooking for dinner, a warm, lived-in scent that felt like peace. The creaks of the old house settling at night were a lullaby, not a warning. I was comfortable, perhaps too comfortable to see the cracks forming just beneath the surface. He seemed content too, or I convinced myself he did. We talked about the future, about trips we'd take, about retirement, all centered around the anchor of this house. It was the backdrop to our entire planned existence. We hosted holidays here, celebrated small victories, nursed each other through sickness. Every memory, every shared moment, was steeped in the atmosphere of this place. It wasn't just property. It was the vessel containing our entire shared history. And I trusted him implicitly with that history, with that future. I never questioned the foundation because I believed he was laying it with me. I was wrong. So utterly, completely wrong. The very ground I stood on was less stable than I knew. The ground didn't just shift, it shattered.
It was a Tuesday.
The house was quiet, the usual evening peace settling in. He came home late, later than usual. There was a tension in him I hadn't seen before, a brittle energy that felt dangerous. He didn't make eye contact, didn't go through the usual motions of shedding his work day. He just stood there, in the entryway, like a stranger in his own home. My home. My stomach tightened. Something was wrong. Terribly wrong. I asked him, my voice smaller than I intended, if everything was okay. He finally looked at me, and the look was chilling.
Cold.
Dismissive. Like he was seeing me for the first time, and he didn't like what he saw.
He didn't soften it.
There was no preamble, no attempt at kindness, not even a flicker of regret. He just delivered the blow, blunt and brutal. I'm leaving, he said. The words hung in the air, heavy and absurd. Leaving? Leaving where? Leaving us. Before I could even process that, before the shock could fully register, he twisted the knife. I'm moving in with Sarah. A name I'd heard before, a colleague he'd mentioned in passing.
Just a colleague.
I dismissed the small, nagging doubts, the gut feelings I'd pushed away.
Fool.
Then came the words that didn't just break my heart, they tore through my sense of reality. The words that would become the focal point of the pain, the insult added to the deepest injury. She'll be moving in here with me next month. Here? Into this house? Into our house? The house my father helped us get? The house where I had just pictured our future together? His arrogance was breathtaking. He wasn't just leaving me. He was replacing me. Immediately. In the life we had built. In the home I had made. And he said it with this casual entitlement. Like it was a simple transaction. Out with the old, in with the new. And the new, Sarah, would be occupying my space, sleeping in my bed, living in the rooms that held my memories. I couldn't breathe. The air was suddenly thin, toxic. The walls seemed to press in. The silence that followed his words was deafening, punctuated only by the frantic pounding of my own heart. My mind reeled, trying to catch up, trying to make sense of the absurdity. Moving her in? Here? Did he think I would just vanish? Pack a small bag and politely disappear, leaving behind everything I had, everything I was, so he could set up house with his mistress. His expression remained impassive, almost bored. He'd clearly thought this through, planned it all out. He wasn't asking, he was informing. This was his decision, his new reality, and I was simply an obstacle to be removed. The cruelty of it was staggering. Not just the betrayal, not just the leaving, but the absolute disregard for my feelings, for our shared history, for the sanctity of the home we had supposedly built together. He was erasing me, not just from his life, but from the physical space that had been the container of that life. And he was doing it with a woman who, until that moment, had been nothing more than a name, a shadow in the background. Now, she was a looming presence, a tangible threat, an invading force preparing to occupy my territory. He wasn't just discarding me. He was mocking me, using the very symbol of our commitment, the house, as the stage for his new affair. His words, "She'll be moving in here," echoed in the sudden, vast emptiness of the room, a pronouncement of my immediate, brutal obsolescence. The world narrowed to the four walls of the house that no longer felt like home. The days bled into each other, a blur of pain and disbelief. I moved through the rooms like a ghost, everything a stark reminder of what was lost, of the future that had been ripped away. The silence was a physical weight, pressing down on me. Every object, every corner, held a memory, now tainted with betrayal. The couch where we watched movies, the kitchen where we cooked together, the bedroom that was now a stage for his infidelity. I tried to function, tried to eat, to sleep, to go through the motions of daily life. But it was like trying to swim through concrete. My body ached with a deep, bone-weary exhaustion. My mind was a chaotic loop of his words, her name, the image of her moving in. How could he? How could he be so cruel? So utterly devoid of empathy? The house, once my sanctuary, became a prison. Every creak, every shadow, felt like a whisper of his betrayal. I avoided certain rooms, couldn't bear to look at things we'd picked out together. Sleep offered no escape. Nightmares were a constant companion, replaying the moment he told me, or imagining her unpacking her boxes, making herself at home in the life he had discarded me from. The practicalities were a nightmare. Sorting out finances, dealing with joint accounts, the sheer logistics of separating a life that had been so intertwined. He was distant, cold, communicating mostly through curt texts or emails, usually about logistics or demands.
There was no apology, no softening.
Just a relentless focus on his new life, his new plans. His focus was always on the house. Who was paying for what, when I would be gone, when she could move in? The house was no longer a shared dream. It was a battleground, a piece of property he seemed determined to claim for his new life. Friends offered comfort, but their words often felt hollow against the enormity of the pain. How do you explain the level of betrayal? The specific cruelty of knowing he was planning to bring his affair into the home you built together? Some people just didn't grasp the depth of the violation. It wasn't just about him leaving. It was about the desecration of the space that had held my love, my hopes, my security. The most insidious pain came from his casual cruelty regarding the house. He spoke about it as if it were already his to dispose of, his to fill with his new life. "Sarah thinks the kitchen needs updating. We're planning on knocking down that wall. You'll need to be out by the 1st of the month. That's when Sarah's lease is up." Each comment was a tiny, sharp shard of glass twisting in the wound. He wasn't just leaving me. He was actively rubbing my face in his new happiness, using the very foundation of our past as the launching pad for his future with her. His confidence was staggering. His assumption that the house was simply a piece of property he could transfer to his new relationship. It felt like he was erasing me, not just from his life, but from the very walls that had sheltered our marriage. He was already planning renovations, already discussing decorations with her, all while I was still living there, surrounded by the ghosts of our shared life. He made it clear this was his house now, his to do with as he pleased. And his pleasure involved bringing her into every room, every space, every memory. It was a constant, relentless assault on my fragile state. The rising challenges weren't just the emotional fallout or the practical difficulties, they were the constant, grinding reminders of his cruelty, amplified by his absolute certainty that he held all the cards, especially when it came to the house. His messages weren't just logistical, they were loaded with casual assumptions of ownership, dripping with entitlement. He'd text about things that needed fixing, issues with the roof or the old plumbing, frame them as shared problems, then pivot to how he and Sarah would handle them once she was there. That leaky faucet? Sarah wants to get a whole new sink, Or, the yard needs work. Sarah's got some ideas for landscaping. It was a deliberate torture, a way to insert her presence into my daily life even before she physically arrived. He was marking his territory, parading his new partner through my emotional landscape. He started becoming more demanding about the timeline. The initial casual mention of next month solidified into specific dates, ultimatums delivered with a cold finality. You need to be out by the 30th. Sarah needs time to move in before she starts her new job. He spoke as if I was a tenant whose lease was up, an inconvenience to be efficiently managed. He talked about lawyers, about asserting his rights, hinting at legal battles he was confident he would win. He seemed convinced that because he was the primary earner, or for some other reason I couldn't fathom, the house was ultimately his, or at least that he had the dominant claim. His arrogance was palpable, fueled by the mistress's eager anticipation of moving into the life I was being expelled from. He would send pictures sometimes, ostensibly about logistical matters related to the house, a photo of a loose floorboard, a crack in the paint, but in the background, I'd catch glimpses, her coat on a chair in his temporary apartment, her car parked outside. Little breadcrumbs of their new life, designed to sting. He knew the house was the most painful point of contention, the symbol of the life he was taking from me and giving to her. He hammered at that vulnerability relentlessly. He became bolder, sometimes calling not just about practical matters, but to reiterate his plans, his excitement. We're looking at paint samples for the living room. Sarah wants something brighter, or Sarah's already planning where her office will go. He was building their future on the ruins of mine, and he wanted me to witness every step of the construction. His voice was annoyingly cheerful, full of the energy of new beginnings, a stark contrast to the stagnant grief I was drowning in. It was like he was dancing on my grave, waving invitations to the party he was throwing there. His absolute certainty, his utter lack of doubt about his right to the house, was terrifying. It made me question everything, made me feel even more powerless. He was the victor, claiming the spoils of war, and the biggest spoil was the home I had loved. It was during one of these calls, after he'd gone on and on about some structural change they were considering for the house, that something inside me snapped. I hung up the phone, my hand shaking, tears of frustration and helplessness streaming down my face. I felt utterly defeated. He had taken everything, my marriage, my future, my sense of self-worth, and now he was taking the physical space that represented it all, handing it over to the woman he'd betrayed me with. I was cornered, adrift, with no solid ground anywhere. That's when I called my father. Not to complain, not to cry, though the tears were still coming. I called him because he was the only person who had ever truly had my back, the only one whose judgment I trusted implicitly, especially when it came to practical matters, the things I felt so ill-equipped to handle in my current state. I just needed guidance. Needed to understand how any of this was fair, how he could just claim the house, how I could possibly fight this. His voice on the phone was calm, steady, a familiar anchor in the storm. I choked out the story, the breakup, the mistress, the house, his cruel boasts about moving her in, his demands that I leave. I told him about the rising pressure, the deadlines, his talk of lawyers, his absolute confidence that the house was his to give. There was a long silence on the other end after I finished, a silence that stretched and filled the space around me. I braced myself for sympathy, for platitudes, maybe for him to offer to help me find a new place. What he said next was entirely unexpected. "The house," he said, his voice deliberate, measured, "is not his." I frowned, confused. What did he mean it wasn't his? We bought it together.
Didn't we?
Dad, we're married. It's community property, isn't it? Or, you helped us. Listen carefully, he interrupted, his tone firm but not unkind. When you two wanted to buy that place, I saw how much you loved it. And I saw, well, I had some concerns. He paused, choosing his words. Not about you. About him. I've seen men like him before. All charm and ambition, but with shallow roots. I wanted to make sure you had security, real security, no matter what happened. He explained the arrangement, the specifics that had blurred for me in the excitement of getting the house. He hadn't just co-signed or given us a down payment. He had bought the house outright. He owned it. The deed was in his name. The payments we thought were mortgage payments were actually part of a specific agreement he'd set up. An agreement that allowed us to live there, build our lives there, with the understanding that it was providing me with a stable home. There were conditions, legal protections built in, things he hadn't burdened me with understanding at the time, because everything seemed fine. One of those conditions was implicit, but powerfully reinforced by the legal structure. The house was for our marital home, for my security. It was never simply a property asset for him to leverage outside of that context, especially not to the detriment of the person my father had intended to protect. The air shifted around me again, but this time it wasn't collapsing. It was expanding. My father owned the house. He owned it. All this time, while my husband was strutting around, planning renovations with his mistress, issuing ultimatums about my departure date, talking about his rights to the property, he had been living in a house owned by my father. The realization hit me with the force of a physical blow, but this time, it wasn't pain. It was shock, followed swiftly by a cold, exhilarating surge of something else entirely. Power. Leverage. The very ground my husband thought was his solid foundation was, in fact, leased land, and the landlord was the man he had just fundamentally wronged. My father hadn't just given us a home. He had given me an escape hatch, a safety net, a hidden weapon I hadn't known I possessed. He explained the legal standing. As the owner, he had the absolute right to determine who lived there. Our living there was contingent on his permission. And bringing in an unauthorized resident, especially in the context of the marital breakdown, violated the implicit agreement, the spirit, and potentially the letter of the law depending on the specifics of the informal lease or occupancy agreement we had. He could, if he chose, terminate the arrangement. He could ask him, to leave. He could evict them. The thought sent a shiver down my spine. Eviction. Him. And her. The woman he was so eager to install in my place. Being forcibly removed from the home he was so sure was his. The ultimate dismantling of his arrogant plans. My father waited, letting the revelation sink in. He wasn't pushing me towards any particular action, just laying out the facts, the reality of the situation he had quietly, carefully built to protect me. He had provided the security he promised, just not in the way I had understood it. He had seen a potential vulnerability I had been blind to, and he had hedged against it. His foresight was staggering, a testament to his quiet strength and unwavering support. He reiterated his position simply. The house was his asset. He had allowed us to live there. Given the circumstances, given the fundamental shift in occupancy and purpose my husband was attempting to force, my father was within his rights to reclaim control of his property. It wasn't about revenge for him, it was about protecting his investment and, by extension, protecting me. But for me, it felt like the universe tilting back on its axis. The scales of justice, so heavily weighted against me moments before, were suddenly swinging violently in my favor. My husband's ultimate weapon, the house, was, in fact, his greatest vulnerability. And I held the key. The thought was terrifying, exhilarating, and utterly, completely consuming. The pressure from my husband intensified, blind to the seismic shift that had occurred beneath his feet. His calls and texts became more frequent, more demanding. The eviction deadline he'd imposed loomed closer. He was finalizing plans, arranging movers, openly discussing with friends how smoothly everything was going, how easy it was to just move on and set up his new life with Sarah in the house. His confidence was not just irritating, it was maddening, knowing what I now knew. He served me with official-looking documents, not legal eviction papers, because he couldn't, but aggressive letters from a lawyer asserting his supposed property rights, demanding my immediate departure, threatening financial repercussions if I didn't comply with his timeline. The letters were full of bluster, legal jargon twisted to sound intimidating. They were designed to scare me, to push me into packing a bag and disappearing quietly. They were proof of his complete conviction in his ownership, his absolute certainty that he held the power. He even started showing up at the house unannounced, sometimes with Sarah in tow, ostensibly to collect some of his things, but really, I knew, to assert his presence, to make me feel like the intruder. He'd walk around, pointing things out to her, discussing changes in hushed tones, acting as if I wasn't even there, or as if my presence was temporary and irrelevant. Sarah would avoid my eyes, a nervous energy about her, but she was complicit in his charade, walking through the rooms that were still filled with my life, planning to replace it with hers. Once, I overheard him telling her loudly, while standing just outside the kitchen where I was deliberately making noise to let them know I was there, "Don't worry about anything. This is my house. She has no legal standing here. It's just a matter of time until she's gone." His voice was thick with arrogance, completely dismissing my rights, my history, my very existence within those walls. Every visit, every call, every letter was a fresh wave of pain, humiliation, and growing, simmering anger. But now, beneath the pain, was the hard, cold core of the secret. I looked at his arrogant face, listened to his confident pronouncements about his house, and a chilling calm settled over me. He was so invested in his lie, so convinced of his power, that he was utterly blind. He was walking a tightrope over a chasm, oblivious that the rope was frayed, and I held the scissors. The deepening crisis wasn't just his actions. It was the tension within me, the internal struggle between the hurt and the potential for retaliation. Did I want to be this person? The one who used a technicality, a hidden truth, to inflict maximum damage? Was I capable of such calculated cruelty, even against someone who had been so cruel to me? His escalating demands, his blatant disregard for my feelings, his public flaunting of his intentions to erase me from the house. It became too much. His arrogance wasn't just an insult, it was a provocation. He wasn't giving me a choice.
He was forcing my hand.
He was so determined to hurt me with the house, to use it as a symbol of his victory, that he had unwittingly created the perfect scenario for his own downfall. The crisis wasn't just about losing the house anymore. It was about reclaiming my dignity, my power, using the very weapon he thought was his. The decision crystallized during one of his particularly obnoxious phone calls, where he was detailing the furniture Sarah was already buying for their new home, my home. He was listing items, colors, textures, describing how they would look in this room, or that room. It was like he was decorating my grave with the spoils of his conquest. As he spoke, I looked around the living room, at the books on the shelves, the photographs on the walls, the worn comfort of the armchair I loved. These weren't just possessions, they were pieces of my life, woven into the fabric of this house. And he was planning to simply sweep them away, replace them with her choices, her taste, her life. The thought was unbearable. It wasn't just about property, it was about the violent erasure of my existence within these walls. His voice droned on, oblivious to my silence. "Sarah thinks a lighter rug would really open up the space. We're going with the minimalist vibe." Minimalist vibe. He wanted to minimize me, my life, our history right out of the house. And that's when it happened. The switch flipped. The hesitant part of me, the part that still felt like the hurt victim, the part that questioned the morality of using my father's leverage, simply evaporated, replaced by a cold, hard certainty. He had crossed a line. He hadn't just left me. He had sought to humiliate me, to erase me, using the very concept of home as his weapon. He deserved whatever consequence came his way. And thanks to my father, the perfect consequence was waiting. "Stop," I said, cutting him off mid-sentence. My voice was flat, devoid of emotion. He paused, surprised by the interruption. "Stop what?" "Stop talking about decorating," I said. "Stop talking about your plans. Stop talking about Sarah moving in." There was a beat of silence, then his familiar arrogance returned. "Look, I know this is hard for you, but you need to accept it. This is happening. Sarah is moving in. This is my house now. I have every right." "It's not your house," I said, the words measured, deliberate, dropping like stones into a still pond. Another silence. Longer this time. "What are you talking about?" "Of course, it's my house. We bought it." "No," I said. "We didn't. My father bought it. He owns it. The deed is in his name." The silence on the other end of the line was absolute. I could hear his sharp intake of breath. Then, a strangled sound, a mix of disbelief and fury.
That's
That's impossible. That's not true. We paid the mortgage. You paid him, I corrected gently. As per the agreement. It wasn't a mortgage, not technically. It was an arrangement. And the arrangement was for our marital home. You breaking up the marriage, bringing in an unauthorized resident. That violates the terms. His response was a torrent of curses, accusations, threats. He accused me of lying, of manipulating my father, of trying to steal his life. He raged about how dare my father, how he would sue, he would fight this, he would make us pay. The arrogance was still there, but now it was laced with panic, with genuine fear. His foundation wasn't just shaky, it was crumbling before his eyes. I listened for a moment, letting his fury wash over me. It felt hollow now, pitiful almost. All that bluster, built on a lie he'd told himself, a truth he'd been willfully blind to. You have 48 hours, I said when he finally paused for breath.
My voice was still calm.
To get your things. After that, my father will be here, with the sheriff, to reclaim his property. And Sarah won't be moving in. You'll both be moving out. I hung up the phone before he could respond. My hand wasn't shaking anymore. It was steady. My heart wasn't pounding with fear. It was beating with a slow, purposeful rhythm. The decision was made. The plan was in motion. He had thrown the first stone, aimed squarely at my home, intending to shatter me. He hadn't realized the house wasn't just stone and mortar. It was built on a foundation he didn't own. And now, that foundation was being pulled out from under him. The turning point wasn't just about fighting back. It was about using his own weapon against him, turning his arrogance into his undoing. I was no longer the victim cowering in the ruins. I was the architect of the reckoning. The 48 hours were tense, silent on his end after that initial outburst. I assumed he was scrambling, maybe calling his lawyer, trying to find some loophole, some way out of the trap he'd walked into. There wasn't one. My father's arrangement was solid, legally sound, designed to protect his asset, and, through that, me. I spent those 2 days systematically going through the house, packing my own things. Not with sadness this time, but with a strange detachment. The objects felt less like anchors and more like artifacts of a life that was over. I packed the things that were mine, that held personal meaning, leaving behind anything that was jointly acquired or that felt tainted by his presence. I moved with a quiet focus, the house feeling strangely neutral now, like a stage being reset after the final act of a play. My father arrived on the morning of the third day, precisely as I told my husband he would. He wasn't alone. With him was a representative from his legal team, a stern, efficient woman, and the sheriff's deputy I'd seen countless times in town, a calm, professional presence. They had the necessary paperwork, the legal authority. This wasn't a negotiation or a discussion. It was a legal process. I stood on the porch, taking a deep breath of the crisp morning air, a mix of dread and grim anticipation churning in my stomach. I felt detached, like I was observing the scene from a distance. My father squeezed my arm, a silent gesture of support. We waited. The legal representative knocked on the door. No answer. She knocked again, louder. Still nothing. A tense silence hung in the air. Had he left already? Had he accepted defeat and slunk away in the night? Part of me almost hoped he had, to avoid the confrontation. But the larger part, the part fueled by weeks of humiliation and pain, wanted to see it through. Wanted him to face the reality he had so arrogantly ignored. Just as the deputy stepped forward, ready to exercise their authority, the door was yanked open. He stood there, looking disheveled, his eyes bloodshot. And behind him, peeking around a shoulder, was Sarah, her face pale, her hair messy. They hadn't left. They had holed up inside, presumably hoping what? That we wouldn't show up? That the legal documents were a bluff. His eyes fell on my father, then the legal representative, then the deputy, and finally, on me, standing slightly apart, a silent observer. His face contorted with a fresh wave of rage and disbelief. You, he snarled, looking at me. You actually did it. The legal representative stepped forward, calm and professional. She explained, clearly and concisely, that they were there to execute an order for possession of the property, owned by my father. She presented the documents. He snatched them, his hands shaking, scanning them frantically. Sarah whispered something to him, her voice high and panicked. He started shouting again, the same accusations, the same bluster, but louder this time, more desperate. This isn't legal. You can't do this. This is my house. We live here. You have no right. The deputy stepped forward, his presence radiating quiet authority. Sir, please calm down. We have verified the ownership and the legal basis for this action. You are required to vacate the premises immediately. Vacate? He laughed, a harsh, ugly sound. We're not going anywhere. Sarah's moving in today. The movers are coming. Just then, as if on cue, a moving truck pulled up to the curb, its large frame a stark contrast to the quaint houses on the street. The movers, two burly men, hopped out, looking confused by the scene on the porch. My husband's face twisted in further agony as he saw them. His plans, his boasts, his entire carefully constructed new life, arriving just in time to witness its own demolition. The legal representative spoke to the movers, explaining the situation calmly. The movers exchanged glances, shrugged, and began to retreat to their truck. They were paid to move things, not to get involved in domestic disputes or legal battles. My husband turned back to us, his face a mask of pure fury. You set this up, he spat at me. You planned this. You lied. You planned to replace me, I said, my voice steady. In my home. You boasted about it. You thought you had all the power. You were wrong. He lunged forward, but the deputy was quick, stepping between us. Sir, I strongly advise you to cooperate. Please gather your immediate necessities. Professional movers will be handling the rest, under supervision, and your belongings will be placed in storage. Storage. Not in the house he'd planned to share with his mistress. Not in their new life. In storage. The ultimate anticlimax to his grand plans. He continued to rage, but it was futile. My father's team was efficient, the deputy unwavering. The movers he had hired to bring Sarah's things in were dismissed. Other movers, arranged by my father's team, arrived shortly after. They went inside, systematic and professional, beginning the process of removing his and Sarah's belongings. He stood on the lawn with Sarah, watching as their boxes, their furniture, the symbols of their intended new life, were carried out of the house. His face was a study in defeat and impotent rage. Sarah was crying openly now, her composure completely gone. The twist wasn't just that my father owned the house. The twist was that my husband, in his supreme arrogance, had been so certain of his control, so determined to use the house to hurt and replace me, that he had been blind to the reality of its ownership. He hadn't just planned to move his mistress into our home. He had planned to move her into a house owned by the father of the woman he was betraying. His boasts, his deadlines, his legal threats, they were all built on a foundation of sand he didn't even realize wasn't his. He thought he was the master of the game, holding the winning hand, when in fact he was playing on a board owned by someone else, someone who had just announced checkmate. His smug satisfaction at my presumed homelessness had set him up for this public, undeniable dismantling of his world. He was blindsided not just by the eviction, but by the fundamental truth he had ignored. The house was never truly his to give. Watching them stand there, on the lawn, surrounded by boxes, their future plans reduced to a pile of possessions waiting for a storage unit, wasn't the triumphant moment I might have expected.
It was. Quiet.
The rage I'd felt for weeks was replaced by an emptiness. They looked small, pathetic even, stripped of their arrogance and confidence. The house, too, felt different. As the last box was loaded and the movers pulled away, a silence settled over the street. The deputy exchanged a few final words with my father and his legal representative, then left. It was just us now. My father, the legal representative, and me, standing on the porch looking at the closed door. Walking back inside felt strange. The air was still, devoid of the recent tension, but also of the familiar scent of my own life that had been overshadowed by his presence and his plans. It was clean, empty, like a slate wiped bare. My things were still there, packed away, but the house felt impersonal, waiting. The immediate aftermath wasn't filled with celebration. It was filled with processing. The adrenaline faded, leaving behind a profound exhaustion. The feeling wasn't pure victory. It was laced with the sadness of what had been lost. The marriage, the trust, the years I had invested, the future I had believed in, they were all gone irrevocably. Winning the battle for the house didn't magically bring any of that back. My father stayed for a little while, his presence a quiet comfort. He didn't say, "I told you so," or dwell on my husband's downfall. He simply talked about what came next, about the house, its future, my future. He reiterated that the house was secure, a safe place for me. It was no longer a battleground. It was simply property, his property, offered to me as a sanctuary. Living in the house after that was a journey. For a while, it felt haunted, filled with the echoes of the past, both the good and the painfully bad. Every room held a memory, now layered with the humiliation and eventual vindication of the eviction. I slowly unpacked my things, deliberately placing them, reclaiming the space not just physically, but emotionally. I rearranged furniture, painted a wall a new color, made small changes that began to erase the ghosts, and infused the house with my own presence, my own future. The house became a symbol, not of a failed marriage, but of resilience, of unexpected strength, and of the quiet, unwavering love of a father who had built me a safe harbor when I didn't even know I needed one. It wasn't the future I had planned, but it was a future built on solid ground, on truth and quiet strength, rather than on the shifting sands of charm and betrayal. The house stood, a silent witness to the storm that had passed, and a promise of the rebuilding that was yet to come. It felt like mine again, truly mine, not because of a deed, but because I had faced the worst within its walls and emerged, bruised but unbroken. The air inside felt lighter, cleaner, filled with the quiet hum of a life being patiently, deliberately rebuilt. It was empty of the noise of their departure, but full of the potential of a new beginning, on my own terms, in the space that was finally, unequivocally, mine to claim. It was a quiet, simple truth. The house was mine to heal in. This house, these walls, they hold the echoes of everything, of naive hope, crushing betrayal, and the quiet strength found in the most unexpected places. It's a story that's left its mark, changed the very way I see the world. If this story resonated with you, if you've ever felt the ground shift beneath your feet, or found strength you didn't know you had, tell me about it. Drop a comment below. Let me know where you're listening from and what time it is. And please, if you haven't already, subscribing really does help bring more stories like this one to life. Thank you for being here, for listening.